Welcome to yet another day in the dangerous world of international journalism. I'm looking out on the blue skies of London. Beautiful hot weather coming. It's going to be 33 to 34 degrees apparently tomorrow. And that can only mean one thing. There's going to be a lot more dinghies arriving on the beaches of Dover and Hastings as we go. Let's talk to the man who knows all about that, Mr. Nigel Farage, leader of the Brexit Party. Nigel, a very good morning to you.
Good morning. And you're absolutely right. Beautiful day, very calm seas. And my intelligence is that so far, 11 dinghies have been apprehended and brought into Dover already this morning. Well, given, on average, there's a dozen to 15 people on most of them, you can see we're already well over 100 people that have come in so far today. And just get a handle on this, because one of the reasons that I went out a couple of months ago to expose this is the pace is increasing. In 2018, 300 people came via that route. In 2019, just under 2,000 came via that route. We are on course, Mike, this year for 7,500. And what I was trying to do was to alert people to it.
Yes, and incredibly, Nigel, you have alerted everybody to it, and yet, aside from talkRADIO, hardly anybody else is paying any attention to it.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid there is, across mainstream media, a view that things like illegal immigration can't be discussed, because if you even debate it, a finger will get pointed at you and you'll be accused of racism and xenophobia and goodness knows what else. When actually what we're talking about here is, properly controlling our borders, protecting ourselves from importing more COVID-19. And here's the real kicker, over the course of the last month, we have seen 2 horrible murderous attacks carried out by people who have failed asylum seekers. If you haven't got a clue where these young men come from, you're potentially putting yourself in a security difficulty as well. And yet, as you say, mainstream media will not talk about it, which is why the Ofcom report that has come out this morning shows that public trust in the BBC and other organisations is literally collapsing.
Yes, and it's hardly surprising. I mean, I've said this many times this year. I never thought I would be so ashamed of my media colleagues as I now find myself to be, because it quite frankly is appalling the way that stories are reported, the way that stories are not reported, and the way that language is used to kind of pretend that something is happening when it clearly isn't.
Yeah, I mean, Priti Patel keeps making tough statements. If any of your listeners choose to write to the Home Office to ask for an explanation of what's going on the channel, they will get the sort of bog standard reply that we are working in close cooperation with the French authorities, that we do actually deport people. It just is nonsensical. And I kind of wonder, because I know that Priti Patel herself would like to get tough on this. I just feel that she's part of a Conservative government and cabinet that aren't really very conservative and don't have the will to do anything about it. Remember, Australia faced this 10 years ago. Australia ended the problem. But it's not just, I think, the vast majority of people who hear about these, and when I say young men, bear in mind that over 80% of those that are coming in through Dover are young males between the ages of 18 and 26, coming from all over the world. In many cases, they have no documentation, so it's difficult for us to know really who they actually are. But if people are angry about that, let me promise you something, they'll be even angrier when they find out later on today exactly where these people go, how many of them there are, and what the cost of the British taxpayer is.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you about, because you put a tweet out this morning basically saying, where do all the illegal migrants that come into Dover go? Yesterday, I went to find out. Now, without wishing to sort of, give away too much, if you want to release it later on, what can you tell us?
I can tell you that at 4:30 on my social media, you will see a video, and this is me in response to my films in the channel. A lot of members of the public emailed in to say, something really fun is happening to our local hotel. It appears to be full. And one of the reports I got was from Bromsgrove in Worcestershire, in the West Midlands. And I was told that the Hilton Hotel Bromsgrove was now full with 147 young men. Asylum seekers, illegal migrants, you can choose the phrase which you prefer. So I went up yesterday to Bromsgrove to investigate this. And I walked through the front door, and asked whether I could book a room. I was told, no, we're closed.
Oh, yeah.
I said, but you can't be closed. I can see lots of people milling about. No, we're closed. And if you go onto the website of the Bromsgrove Hilton, you'll find they're booked for the rest of the year. And the reason is that the government have taken over the hotel. They've given the contract to a big company called Serco. And we are now, and just get ready for this, we are now in hotels and private accommodation. We are currently housing 48,000 people who have illegally come into the United Kingdom, who are waiting for a very long period of time to have their asylum claims dealt with. Even if their asylum claims are rejected, which in most cases they will be, they still won't be forced to leave the United Kingdom. So we're putting people up in 4-star hotels, giving them food, giving them £40 a week spending money, free healthcare, free dental care. And you know, Mike, the estimated cost of this over the next 10 years and the contracts that have been given out to these big companies, it's 4 billion sterling. All right. I mean, that is a vast sum of money. And that estimate was made before the increase in numbers that are coming in this year. So it's going to be even bigger than that. And
that's extraordinary. You know, that is absolutely extraordinary, Nigel. I'm not quite sure.
It is extraordinary.
I think I'm going to ask you to repeat the numbers again, because I think people are going to be listening to this going, actually, I can't believe my ears. 48,000 people.
I tell you what they can't believe, and that is that nobody, and I mean nobody, in our national broadcasters, in our national newspapers, has done anything about this story. They all think it's too difficult, too awkward, too embarrassing. So the figures are, we are currently housing in hotels and private houses 48,000 people, over 80% of whom are young men between the ages of 18 and 26. And the estimated cost of this for the next 10 years is £4 billion. And that is an underestimate. And of course, you know, the other side of this story, and it was revealed a little bit, I think, in Leicester the other week and with some of the fruit picking farms, is that once they get rejected, because they're not refugees, they're not, you know, under the 1951, you know, Geneva Convention definition of refugees, very few of these people qualify. When they're rejected, they stay in the country and then go into effectively the slave economy, which we know is booming in many parts of this country. And, you know, frankly, a lot of our big employers are totally unscrupulous about this. You know, we should be hanging our heads in shame that this kind of thing is going on in modern day Britain.
Well, all you've got to do to sort of double check all of that you've just told us is look at what happened in Glasgow just a few weeks ago, where a hotel which was full of asylum seekers right in the centre of Glasgow, I think it was in Bath Street, which I know well, and there was, you know, a guy went berserk with a knife and stabbed a police officer and tried to stab many other people, and it turned out that the entire hotel was full of asylum seekers.
Yeah, I mean, look, we must be slightly careful. You know, not every single person that comes in to the country, you know, is going to behave badly. But you know, when we saw this in 2015 across the Mediterranean, do you remember the very large numbers crossing the Mediterranean? And when Mr. Juncker, on behalf of the European Union, basically said anyone that sets foot on EU soil will be allowed to stay. You know, when that happened, ISIS publicly said, we will use this route to get our operatives into London. And here's a very sobering thought. Of the 8 men that committed those appalling barbarities in Paris just a few years back, 5 of them had got into France by crossing the Mediterranean on small boats. So there is a very real security issue here. And the first duty of the British government should be to protect its people. And we're not, Mike, we're not having that debate, and we should be.
Yes, exactly. Because quite frankly, and I'm certainly not suggesting that all of these people could be a danger, but at the very least, they need to be tested for COVID-19, because it makes a complete mockery of an already shambolic kind of idea of quarantine. Last time you and I spoke, I think, about this, I said the only way to get onto the beach at Hastings is to arrive illegally from France, because everybody else was told that the beaches were closed, right? But if people are being told when they come back from a perfectly safe place like the Canary Islands that they have to quarantine for 14 days, and yet 1,000 people you say are arriving today who won't have to quarantine
No,
at all.
no, not 1,000. I'm saying well over 100 today.
Yeah.
Just be clear about that. But there was a boat taken into Malta earlier this week with 85 people on board, and the Maltese authorities tested them for COVID-19, and 65 of them tested positive.
Goodness
so there
me.
are real risks. And more broadly, I mean, your point about quarantine and all the rest of it. If we were testing people at airports, if we had an effective test and trace scheme, and don't forget, Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock told us it would be a world-beating test and trace regime. If we had that, we wouldn't need to quarantine anybody.
No, of course. And that is the sort of the hole in the whole story, isn't it? Because, I mean, you've been away, you were in Italy, and I presume it looked like it was pretty normal activities going on in Italy. The restaurants are open, the bars are open. You sent a couple of pictures back. It looks as though life is relatively okay there. You come back here and there's no problem at all. Why is it that this kind of, we seem to be being held hostage now by our chief medical officer, who seems to think that we're never going to get out of this?
Well, I mean, I think there is a very real risk, isn't there, of a second wave? And just looking at the numbers, we're seeing it now in Belgium and all over Europe. Looking at the numbers, they are concerning. Of course they are. But look, we just simply cannot go back into full lockdown. Millions of people just will not be able economically or even socially to survive that properly. So what we've got to learn to do is to live with this. And those that are very vulnerable, for them, it's incredibly tough because they're going to face perhaps very long periods of being cut off from their families and their friends. But we've got to learn to live with this. And that means, testing and tracing. We were promised that back in May, this would be happening. And I bet, if we ask your listeners now, how many of them have actually been contacted by the test and trace system, we'd find it was alarmingly low.
Right.
We have to learn to live with the virus, and that means the government has to get on top of this. And at the moment, it's all words and no delivery.
Yeah, because at the moment, the line coming out of Downing Street is that there's no point in testing people as they arrive back at the airport because it's not a silver bullet. It's not the answer. Well, if it's not the answer, then why are we testing anyone?
Well, quite. I mean, look, what really, of everything in the last 5 or 6 months, the thing that made me the angriest was the day that Lombardy in northern Italy locked down. On that day, 17 flights came in from Milan's Malpensa airport into UK airports without a single person being tested. And we know that the main spread of coronavirus in the early stages in the United Kingdom came from those flights coming in from Italy. So we do nothing at the outbreak of the crisis, and we wait 4 or 5 months and then start with 6 hours notice to put quarantines on Spain. I mean, it really isn't joined up in any way at all.
It's really not. And you, of course, got some grief, didn't you, when you went over to Tulsa to see Mr. Donald Trump, the President of the United States?
Yes.
People said, why is he going to the pub? He's a disgrace, absolutely awful man, which they would have said whether you went to the pub or not, no doubt. But
well, of course.
Do tell us what you made of Joe Biden's performance that we saw overnight, seemingly not actually knowing where he was.
Well, didn't know where he was. And you might have also seen a young aide was grabbing him by the arm and dragging him around the place as if he didn't know where he was going. Look, I'm very worried about the Joe Biden situation, very worried indeed, because I want Biden to get through the Democratic convention. I want Biden to be the presidential candidate for the Democrat Party, because I know that when it comes to those 3 head-to-head debates, which of course the Americans have been having since 1960, Donald Trump will tear him to pieces because he doesn't, as you say, know where he is. So I'm going to go easy on Joe Biden today, because otherwise they might ditch him and get somebody quite efficient.
Yeah, well, I mean, as long as it's not Hillary Clinton, I suppose. But I mean, it's astonishing, really, isn't it, that the Democrats are in such a bad way that Joe Biden is the finest man they could find to run against President Trump.
Well, I mean, similarly, of course, 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton was a very, very tainted candidate in every way. So they are making life as easy for the Republicans as they possibly can. There is a perception that Trump has not had a great COVID as leader. But I tell you something, all those newspaper reports that are telling you day after day that Biden's 11 points in the lead, that it's all over, that Trump is finished. He's out of the door on November the 3rd when the election takes place. I would just say this to them. Do not underestimate Donald Trump. A lot of people have made that mistake in business and politics over many years. And secondly, when you look at the polling, it's very interesting. Over half of Joe Biden's people who say they'll vote for him say they're going to vote for him because they don't much like the other guy. There is no positive vote out there for Joe Biden. And if your voters, if their only motivation to vote for you is they're not keen on the other guy, it means their propensity to actually go out and vote on November the 3rd is much, much lower. So I think for that reason, and also, national polls that show an 11-point lead for Biden, do you know what? If in California, which bear in mind has got a population of 40 million, if in California, Joe Biden wins by 8 million, it makes no difference because he's going to win that state anyway. What really matters are the 5 to 10 key swing states. And in those states, whilst at the moment Trump's behind, he is no further behind than he was at this stage in 2016. So my message to people would be never underestimate Donald Trump.
No, I say exactly the same thing. Nigel, listen, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Again, we should look out for 4:30 when you release the report and the real story of what is going on with the illegal migrant business in this country. Nigel Farage, head of the Brexit Party, thank you very much indeed.